Yeah, I'm gonna welcome Sue, Isabel again, and Tariq. Hello, hello. All
Hello.
right.
Hi. Hi. Nice to see you all.
Hey, everyone.
Hi,
And
Tariq. Hi, Sue. Hi,
Hi.
Dan.
we're here for some testing yarns, right? So if I'm gonna, at the end of the session, if I'm gonna see Tariq doing some needlepoint work, that would make my day.
Sure, no problem. I'm ready.
All right, so let's start this. So the whole point is to share stories, right? And then I'm gonna start with something that I heard Isabel saying in her session previously, is that people who are in the testing profession get here from either from the start or from various other domains. So I want to ask you, how did you start? How did you get to
Starting
do
with
this?
me.
Isabel, you have the floor.
Yeah. Well, contrary to what I said in my talk, I actually, in a way, had quite a conventional start. Well, yes and no. After I left school, I worked in a factory for a bit and as a cleaner and as a cook. So a number of different jobs like that, just ordinary jobs. And then I went and did a computer science degree. So I was a leap away from menial jobs into computer science. And I did some programming work. And then I went and taught for a few years because I wasn't sure I wanted to be a programmer. And then when I came back into IT, I was offered a job as a software tester rather than as a programmer because there was a concern that I'd had 2 or 3 years out of the industry. I think there was a question on my session about, things change quickly, the tools change all the time. And so there was a feel that you get out of date with the software engineering tools really quickly, but if I got into testing, I could then move back into development once I'd shown that I could do some testing. And actually, once I was in the testing role, I realized this is more interesting than doing development. This is more interesting than coding. This is where I really belong. And I know for some people that will be a controversial view, but for me, it's the most fun to do the testing. So that's how I got into it.
Well, I also know similar examples, but we'll get back to that because I have some follow-up questions. Isabel? Oh, sorry, Sue?
Yeah, a very similar sort of thing to Isabel, except I started off wanting to be a scene of crimes officer for the police. And unfortunately, I have an injury to one of my knees, which meant the police wouldn't take me. So I started looking around for what was called other sciences at the time and fell into computing and started working with applications for small companies. And the stuff that was being written at that time for these small companies was rubbish. And I kept on thinking there's got to be a better way to create this code. And that got me more and more interested in testing, and I moved across into being a tester. But of course, starting out as wanting to be a forensic scientist, it just became natural. So instead of looking for fingerprints and evidence of crimes, I was now looking for bugs and faults in software.
I can interrupt. Yeah, I think Adam Thornhill has a book, Your Code is a Crime Scene, or something like that. So
right. I haven't heard of that one. I have to look that one up.
yeah, it quite fits. How about you, Tariq?
Yeah, for me, it was academic path. Like I did my bachelor's degree in computer science at Florida Tech, and at the time, Florida Tech had 2 very prominent folks in testing, Dr. James Whitaker and Dr. Kem Kaner. And actually, testing was the only elective that you could take twice at Florida Tech and get credit for it because they had 2 very different styles. And so I ended up in James's software engineering class, and then took his testing class. Everyone was always talking about James as a great speaker, and I think he captured me when he would walk in at the beginning of class and just show Windows break, right, very easily, right, and bring down the software. And I was very fascinated like that. And I think it's the part of our minds that really likes to understand how things work and how people build things and all that stuff. And I think similar to Sue and Isabel, I realized that this is actually, not only is it more challenging than trying to build something, because people normally construct something very quickly and, you know, it's not really done yet, but it was actually more fun to figure out how exactly it was working, what was intended, and cool ways to make it kind of show that it wasn't working. And that was what kind of attracted me to everything. And then from there, I decided I wanted to really learn everything about software engineering, and in particular, how we can engineer systems with quality and test them.
Right. So, yeah, I think each of you has, I don't know, a lot of experience and background in this, so which makes our discussion even more interesting. How do you feel that, I don't know, this profession or what we're doing now in the test, but not only in testing, but in software development, how does it look now compared to, I don't know, 10 years ago or something? Yeah, if anyone wants to pick it up, for instance, let's go with Sue. I feel like a teacher in school, and I have some.
Well, Isabel did raise her hand a minute ago, so.
Oh, really? Sorry.
Isabel, did you have something to say?
I was just wanting to go back to what Tariq was saying, because I think having James and Kem to teach you, I mean, that must have been mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, I mean, this fits in with the question Dan's just asked, because they've both been around a long time. You're a little bit younger, obviously, because they taught you, but it feels to me like there's things that they were teaching, and I can remember reading their books, you know, years ago and really learning from them, but it feels to me like there's stuff that's still happening that they were talking about. How do you think? I mean, what do you think, Tariq?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. Like, I was really fortunate to land at Florida Tech and to have such great folks to be inspired by, really. But you're right. Like, they were, you know, at the time, like, there was just so much going on, and there was so much that they started that, quite frankly, is still relevant today, still applicable. It was actually one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of even jump in here, because, like you were saying, I might just be a little bit younger than you guys, but that whole generation is what inspired me. And you know, I really still feel whenever I see folks getting scared about new technology, microservices, machine learning, I kind of pull them back to, like, what is my roots of some very solid foundations that were laid by folks like James Whitaker and Kem Kainer and you know, others, right? So.
Yeah, and that just ties in, you know, with the piece I did a little earlier on. I'm still using the standard produced in 1997. So how, you know, the difference between what you do for testing in, what's that, 23 years ago, and today, I still use the stuff that's in here. So, and I foresee that I will still be using that in another 20 years' time. So in terms of what changes and what stays the same, the underlying principles will stay the same. They won't change. The technologies we use, and possibly the techniques that we use, they will have to change because of the product that we're looking at. But the fundamentals are fundamental. They're not going to change.
Yeah.
I think as well that a lot of things cycle. So one of the things I've got interested in recent years more and more was, first of all, usability in the 90s, which in terms of my career feels like quite recently. I'm aware it's a long time ago now, I say that, but then more recently UX. But you look at the roots of those areas, UX feels like it's the new latest buzzing thing in parts of the industry. And the roots of that have been around since the 70s, 80s, 90s. It's just that it got ignored for a long time. And if you look at some of the stuff, even some of the stuff around AI, and I know I'm dangerously getting close to Tariq's expert area here, but some of the things that I did in my computer science degree in the 1970s in AI is still relevant. So there are things that look like they're radically different, and it's that they've come up to the surface. Things bubble up to the surface. The industry gets really excited about them. Everybody gets into that for a bit, and then something else bubbles up to the surface. And this one over here, it just recedes a little bit, and then a bit later it'll come back again.
Yep.
And it kind of changes a little bit, but I think you're right, Sue, that there's some fundamental principles that stay the same. And, you know, there's a big underlying thing, which I suspect for all of us will be the same, which is this is stuff that we're building for people and it's being built by people. So all the human interaction stuff, whether it's within the team or between people in the software, that, you know, human beings aren't evolving quickly. They stay the same. So the way that people react to things, the more we try and work together, the more we intersect, the more important that becomes. But it's never not been important. Does that make any sense?
It does. And picking up on your element earlier on in terms of the cycles of things, that yeah, it's I have a theory that things work in roughly 20-year cycles. And I think it's something to do with the new generation coming in. So the 20-somethings, that possibly they weren't aware of some of the things that we have been through, because, you know, we have been through 2 of the cycles at least. So things like, you know, recently I was doing an upgrade to my laptop. My laptop decided to do some updates, and all of a sudden a new browser appears on my laptop, which I don't want. I didn't want. I'm quite perfectly happy with the browser I've got at the moment. I don't want a browser being enforced on me, but I can't delete it. And this was something that happened 20 years ago, and I believe there was a lawsuit around it because 20 years ago a browser was pushed out onto laptops that people didn't want. So it's everything seems to go in this rough 20-year cycles, and as long as we can maintain those lessons from the 20-year cycles, we're going to build on that body of experience with regard to testing. It's when we forget the lessons that we have trouble, because we're going to have to relearn all over again as to, you know, what's happening. So I don't know what's going to happen with this browser that I can't get rid of, but it's sort of pushing me towards a different operating system. I've now got a Linux machine because it doesn't have a browser that I didn't want.
Yeah. A lot of non-IT people I've met recently are very, very angry about that. You know, about that it being imposed. That company is going to rue the day, I suspect.
Let's not open up a bigger can of worms, right? I'll just add 2 things to what you guys have said really quickly. The first thing is that, like, you guys talked about the cycles, but you forgot a very important part of the cycle is that they love to add a new name, right? Because if it's a new name, it's something new, right? So that's something that we always see. And I remember when contract testing started to be a big thing because of microservices, right? And ironically, this wasn't a new name on anything, because contract testing, I actually studied contract testing while I was in graduate school, and I just remember shaking my head like, what are you guys talking about? Like, we learned this before. Like, this is nothing different. But yeah, they love to spin a new name on things, and that's one thing that I've noticed as well, and kind of make it completely new to whoever is now seeing it for the first time. The second part I'd like to add is just that I agree 100% that fundamentals are important, and that they generally are things that we lean on. The way that I like to look at it, especially from more of a research perspective, is that, like, yes, like use your fundamentals, and if you don't know them because you didn't learn them or you didn't live them, then at least have the mindset to go search for them, right? So get into that mindset to search first and do a survey to make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, but that there probably will be some things that are new, right? And it's okay if they're new. You build on, and I think we mentioned that just at the end there, that you build on those fundamentals, and you may build or create something new and innovate in that space and extend what others have done. And I think that those things are really important.
All right, but then, so you mentioned that, yeah, the principles more or less stay the same, and then it goes in cycles, and we learn from past cycles, past experience. But in theory, but in practice, how do you feel it's going? How good are we at learning and adapting what we've been through to, I don't know, new challenges and new experience?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Because yeah, it's the next generation that are coming through that as Tariq has just said, you've got to ensure that those folk try and understand what they don't know, and rather than reinventing the wheel and coming up with what they think is the new thing, that they should look at doing some research beforehand. You know, is there a way already of doing this? Does it map to what we have in the past? But yeah, at the moment, I think there's a bit of a problem, a disjoint, in that because these are so-called new technologies, that they're trying to invent new technologies, new ways of looking at them, new ways of testing them, or not testing them, which is another aspect. Because another cycle that I've certainly experienced is the fact that, you know, oh, we don't need to test stuff because all this stuff is generated by other systems, or it's you know, it's written in a way that means it won't have bugs. You know, we don't need testers because people are going to write good code. So that's where I think we're having a bit of a problem at the moment, and it will probably, you know, we'll move on in some of the other questions around the role of a tester, because as Isabel alluded to in her presentation, the tester's role is changing. People are saying that testers ought to be more technical. So it's a role that's often been thought, well, we can get rid of it. We don't need testers. Testing is a hygiene factor, things like that I've heard. So if we lose the testing practices, I think we will have more problems. But then, hey, I will say that because I'm a tester.
I met somebody recently who's a retired university lecturer, and we had a conversation, and they were saying to me, oh, you know, what is it you do in the IT industry? So I said, well, you know, I focus on software quality and software testing. And real raised eyebrows. And this person said to me, oh, I thought we'd managed to finish with software testing in the 1970s when we introduced formal methods. I said, no, I fear we're still continuing to do it. And I think that's one of the answers, because you know, the scope of what you need to test is very wide. It's not just the code, it's not just the software, it's also any sort of requirement specification, user story, ideas. It's also any sort of documentation or online information. It's also the interaction of different systems. It's also what the experience is of a customer or end user with the entire company. It's also how things are sold to people and how they're supported. There's no aspect of an organization's activities that can't be subject to testing. And so where we limit ourselves sometimes as an industry is thinking we're dealing with this little bit here, when in fact, if we allow our scope mentally to widen, what we think we're allowed to ask questions about, what we think we're allowed to investigate, what we think we're allowed to raise risks about, firstly, we make our job more interesting. Secondly, we make what we do more significantly. We also add to our stress levels because we become more and more involved at more and more strategic levels, but it's actually very rewarding. And I think that's the thing about testers need to be more technical, is one direction. Testers also need to be more business focused, more user focused, more organizational focused, more environmentally focused, more ethically focused. You know, there's a lot of ways that as an industry we can develop and add real value to what we're doing. It's when we sit small in the code and are just doing things which look like that they can be automated that people start thinking we can be replaced.
Yeah, it's a lot of the mentality that we look for silver bullets. Like, we love to look for silver bullets in software engineering, and ironically, like, a lot of those silver bullets seem to be targeting around testing, right? So at one point in history, formal methods was supposed to be that silver bullet, and as someone who's taught formal methods in university and in the college setting, and taught software testing in that same setting, you start to realize that these things are all very complementary in how we actually get towards a place where we can engineer systems that are reliable, secure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like Isabel mentioned, like, testing is a very multi-dimensional, multifaceted thing. And so business-facing aspects of testing are just as important as the technology-facing aspects, which may be just as important as the cultural aspects. And you have all of these dimensions, and the one common thread where software testing becomes a very powerful tool is, how do you mix and match these different techniques? How do you be very selective in what you do because there's limited time, and still be very effective in the testing that you do, to reduce risk and all these other things that we know. So again, I feel it is mainly folks trying to just look for this one thing, right? And today, unfortunately, that one thing is AI, right? AI will replace everything, right? But again, as we're seeing through all of that, like, there's a very specific role for testers to play there as well, and critical thinking and those things don't go away because we have new technology.
I mean, I can come in with an anecdote from, I'm just trying to think when this was, and I think it might have been the mid 1980s, so it's a while ago. But it was a project where the organization wanted to replace a number of its back office systems. So it was things like payroll and goods inward and stock control, all of those sort of back office big mainframe systems. And they were replacing them for a variety of reasons. And one of those was the payroll system. And I asked about performance on the payroll system. I wasn't specifically testing that, but I asked the question. And it turned out that the new payroll system wouldn't run in the slot in the batch overnight on a Wednesday night. So the IT team said, that's fine, we'll move it to the Thursday night. And I said, well, I think in that case, we're going to have a problem. And they said, why so? Because, you know, it can run Thursday night, people are being paid into their bank accounts and so on and so forth. It's not going to make a big difference. And what I'd realized was that the performance testing actually needed to include not just the running of the batch, but the bit after the batch had run, where the pay slips came out and people were actually paid. Now, a large group of employees of this organization were manual workers who were working physically many miles away from headquarters, and they were paid in cash on a Friday morning. So the batch ran on Wednesday night. On Thursday, the pay packets were made up. They were couriered out by motorbike so that Friday morning people could be given their pay packets. And so I pointed this out. If you run the batch on Thursday night, people aren't going to get their pay packets Friday morning. Surely this is a problem. This is a performance problem that's about the speed of the motorbikes and the speed of the, you know, getting the stuff into envelopes. And they said, no, it's fine. We'll just pay them Monday morning. It's kind of like, hang on, you know, what's going to happen here? This is actually, You know, this is actually about kids' food on the table. This is about children not having food. This is about people not being able to do their shopping at the weekend, maybe not being able to pay their rent. And there was like, so taking that narrow view, it fits in the batch here, that's good enough. It is not enough. It's like you have to see that whole picture. And with something like that, it's actually effect on society. And from the point of view of the organization, the risks there were around union action, you know, and press reporting and all sorts of things like that. So your performance testing is not about how long does it take for the batch to run. Your performance test is about how long does it take to deliver the entirety of the solution we're offering. So that was quite a long anecdote, but I feel it's relevant.
No, it was relevant. And you were saying about the role of a tester. And I think that goes for a lot of disciplines around software development overall. It's like, yeah, we need to be, I was reading, team-minded individual. So to be very good and in-depth in your area of expertise, but then understand also the others, like if you're a tester, understand a bit of development, UX, business analysis, and demonstrate some empathy towards them. Not necessarily that you need to do them as the other person, but to be able to understand and carry out a conversation and see the overall picture and what it implies.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's pushing out, you know, more and more systems are getting closer and closer to the individual. So, you know, Isabel just illustrated there the days where the pay was couriered on a motorbike out to site. You think about it, in the last 20 years, again, IT systems have pushed out closer and closer to the end user. We don't go to a bank anymore to do any banking. The banks make us do our banking. So, you know, now if I want to pay a check in, I have to take a photograph of the check, and that is then zapped away by my laptop or tablet or phone to be scanned and pushed into my bank account. So if I do still get checks. I have relatives who still send me checks as birthday presents. And part of me is like, yay, I've got a check. And the other part of me is, oh God, I've got to pay this thing in now. Whereas it used to be easy because you took it to the bank and somebody else did it for you. But all of these systems now are pushed out to the end user. So, you know, my mother, who is in her 80s, is now grappling with this idea of having to photograph a check when someone sends it to her. So.
You've touched on something there, Sue, which comes back to one of Dan's earlier questions, which is what's changed. And I think one of the things that's changed is that although there's always been an ethical and societal element to what we're doing in IT, it's now overwhelming. It's a really, I mean, I think the ethical considerations around what I'm going to call ordinary business systems, but also around systems used socially, around collection of data, around processing of data, around privacy, around what's a reasonable thing for a system to do or not do, around people being left out.
Yeah.
I think that's a massive, massive area that over the last 10, 15 years has just become more and more important, more and more people talking about it. And certainly big discussions in the UK at the moment about government use of algorithms, specifically in the current situation with grading of school exams. There's been a massive debate about what's actually reasonable for government to do and not do. Is that true too in the States, Tariq? Are people querying algorithmic activity by government?
Very much so. There's quite a lot of worry on a lot of those things, and then even tracking, and you know, like there's a lot that we kind of are, I think, technologically hoping to do to help us in this whole global pandemic, but it just raises a lot of privacy concerns. It raises a lot of safety concerns, hacking, and like everything. And you're seeing a lot more worry about not only government, but just you know, the folks that control all the information, right? The tech giants, so to speak, and stuff like that. So a lot of that is going on, but then I'm also seeing a lot more, quite frankly, hacking and scamming attempts, right? Like since this has started, my phone rings. I had to put it on silent before this because there's someone claiming that they're a social security officer or that they're with the police department, and I'm in trouble. I'm like, but I need to give them my address. I'm like, the police don't need my address. They can find me, and the social security number folks have my social. Like, you know, this is just, it's just becoming a huge problem with data security, and they're all testing problems, right? Which is cool for us and not cool for us, right? Because we need to find better ways to really protect our systems, and again, it's bigger than just the system itself. It's a cultural and a global thing now, if you look at it.
Would you see, I'm sorry, Dan, I'm coming in with questions here, and I know that was sort of your job, but it's kind of like, I'm just intrigued by what Tariq's saying. So Tariq, do you think that there will be specific training or education that could go to testers to help them with dealing with these areas? Because I think it's something we've slightly neglected in the past, and I was just thinking, what would you see as being a good way for people to educate themselves about those areas?
Yeah, no, so I see this as an opportunity, a big opportunity for the testing community. And you know, we probably have some questions there around like the role and the future of testing in respect to the role. And I think that the skills, I see it every day, you know, also since I'm embedded in the whole AI and machine learning world, but they're critical thinking skills, they're skills that testers bring to the table. And I think we really have to start to just think about our profession a little bit differently, and think about how the skills that we've picked up while testing software apply to other domains outside of even software, right? Like a lot of these problems that we're talking about in terms of privacy, about worrying about security, about the spammers and all these things. Again, there are certain questions that we ask as testers that help to reveal facts that help us to solve these challenges and make the software better, right? Now it's like, maybe we need to use that to make the world better, right? Or just to survive in this new world and stuff like that. So for me, I'm seeing it as an opportunity for us to really look at the skills that the role brings and start to see, you know, testers plugging into different roles. Maybe the title is different, but what you're doing in terms of validation and verification of something. And again, I love Sue's story about the forensics, because I love those things. Actually, like I love trying to solve, like any kind of puzzle in a movie or in a show, and it's really piecing things together. And I think that that's what we do as testers. We're really investigating and piecing things together and seeing what other people didn't see. And that skill is applicable in so many fields, fields.
Yeah, I definitely think so. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently is, what title can we give ourselves as we move forward? Titles are one of those awkward things that you do need something. I wish we didn't have to have something that gave a shorthand notation of what we do, but a title is useful to, you know, to describe to other people what we do. So one of the ones that I was thinking around is a sort of user quality advocate, that I am based on the idea that software and IT systems are here to stay. And let's face it, we couldn't do what we're doing now. We couldn't have carried on ticking over whilst COVID was out there if we didn't have things like Zoom and the systems that we've got. So software is here to stay, hardware is here to stay. It's going to get even more integrated in the world that we live in. So rather than just, as Isabel said, staying small in the code, that we've got to be quality advocates on behalf of the end user, right the way through the systems, representing people like my mother, who doesn't want to take photographs of her check. So it's taking that out to speak for people who don't necessarily have the same breadth of understanding that we have.
Right. So okay, now we slowly transitioned into what the future will bring and how a tester role should evolve, which is great. Because I also had the question, since I think all of you at some point mentioned AI, and I'm also speaking as from a development background. All the things that we've been trained to do up until recently was that remove any uncertainty from our systems. Like, yeah, you're doing all your coding and of course to follow every path and see that even edge cases yield a good result, and then people are testing that. But when you transition to an AI system, you need somehow to embrace this uncertainty. You have a lot more variables and you cannot foresee all of them. And that's the first reason you use AI to begin with, right? So then how do you test such a system?
We're all going to look at Tariq now.
Just a small question to kind of get everyone excited, right? So yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a lot involved there, but I'll start by reminding us that there's certain principles that we have as testers, and that's how I approach this, right? So you're right. The fact of the matter is that even though in traditional paradigms we like to try to make things certain, the truth is that there's uncertainty in the world. There's uncertainty in everything that we do. The difference is now that AI and machine learning systems are able to actually model that uncertainty. And how do you test a system that is non-deterministic? Well, there's some approaches that I learned even before AI was a big thing in my life on how to approach that, right? You can either try to force determinism, which is what we usually like to do, but you actually break the system to do so. You change it, and now you're not really testing the system as it was in the wild. Or you try to find ways to actually test the non-deterministic system in a non-deterministic setting, right? And the challenge there becomes there may be certain test paths that you can't handle because of the non-determinism, right? Like, how do you, without looking in the black box, you may never traverse certain paths through the box, and that becomes a challenge, right? So the first thing is to understand is that these systems are highly adaptive, highly dynamic. They learn after we release them. So even if you test them beforehand, your testing is only going so far. And then the second part is that not all of the non-deterministic things that they do are bad. Like, you actually want the system to adapt at times. Human beings, we adapt, right? The difference is that we tend to analyze when we're adapting and kind of know and feel some confidence that our adaptation was the right choice, right? And therefore, yeah, we used to do it this way, but now we need to do it this way because this thing changed in the world, right? And that is always happening. We're taking in that information, we're processing it, and we're making a decision to change, right? But we also, as we make those changes, we also are checking to make sure that those changes aren't causing chaos, right? And so for me, this is the same way that you approach testing AI and machine learning systems. There needs to be some intrinsic mechanism for testing embedded in the system. And so recently I've been talking a lot about, people are always with, like, shift left. Again, these are just reinventions of terms. Shift left and shift right. I feel that the next shift that we need to see is inward, where the testing is actually on the inside, and we've built systems in a way that they can monitor themselves, that they can check and they can report back, and they can flag, hey, human, I need help. I'm not sure about this, or these kind of things. So monitoring and analyzing at runtime is a huge part of these systems if we're going to get there. So that's my general blanket statement for how we would start to think about testing these types of systems. But there's so much that needs to come together to do so. So I hope that kind of helps bring a couple of things in perspective.
I mean, I think that's really good, because I think you're right. It's the general principles and then the add-ons, and thinking about the way that we build the systems to be self-testing in some way, and that part of that learning analytics is about that. And then I think the human activity around it, the testerly activity, a lot of that comes back to somebody being prepared to ask the questions, if necessary, questions that sound stupid, questions that query what everybody else is taking for granted, questions that look at the problem in a different way, questions about ethics, questions about what if. And sometimes then some of the testing you do is really powerful, not because you're actually running the software, but because you're running thought experiments about what might happen. And from that, starting to identify things that the designers and the coders, the programmers, need to actually build into the systems, like fail safes, for example.
Yeah, I like to think about this, and I always bring up my kids in this kind of question here and scenario, because they're learning, they're very adaptive, they're very uncertain in many things, and we as parents are trying to, my wife and I are trying to train them, and there's times where we let them go and we give them a little rope, and then we say, no, 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 you just can't do that. And I feel like if you take that analogy and apply it to and this kind of brings back in the role and the future of testing, but I think in the future, testers will be the ones training these systems, probing them like Isabel mentioned, to find inconsistencies and challenge those inconsistencies, and actually train or update or say like, no, this is the right oracle that we should be using and not what you're doing right now, and things like that, right? They'll be kind of, it'll change, right? Before we were writing the scripts or writing the test scenarios and doing that, like now the system may be able to generate those things, but again, how do you know that those things are the right test to run? How do you know that that's the right thing for the humans that are going to be impacted by, again, this analogy that Isabel came up with was excellent, right? Like, you can't just wait until Monday to pay these people. Like, they might be dead by then because they had no food over the weekend, right? These kind of things, I think, crop up.
I like your analogy as well, in terms of hey human, I need some help. It's almost like marking your homework. As a kid, I would be doing the homework, and then if I got stuck, I might ask mum, I might ask dad, or more likely I'd wait until I got back to school and ask the teacher. But at some point, someone would need to mark my homework and give me feedback as to was I on the right course or not.
Yeah.
All right, so then it's kind of sad news for the people or the companies, because I've heard this also quite often. Well, not that often, but you do hear it in the past period that indeed, since testers need to become more and more technical, then the developer and the testing profession might merge. But then no, it's more of a, it's not going to happen, right?
When I was first a developer in the 1970s, most of my time was spent testing. Most of my time was spent actually not on the computer at all, but dry running the code, desk checking everything, and a small amount of time writing code and designing the code, and a very small amount of time indeed actually compiling and running the code. So you have one compiler every 24 hours, 20 minutes a week to actually run the software on the machine. And then I would say 80% of the rest of my time was sitting desk checking the code, running it through. So in those days, you were a designer, a developer, a tester, all as one in a lot of organizations. And then over time, it split apart, and there were good reasons for that, and it gave a level of independence, and that was a good thing. But what wasn't a good thing was then the silo and the two groups thinking that they were different, because it's a joint enterprise between the developers and the testers and the UX people and the architects and everybody else to produce something that's actually wanted and is useful. And you need those different roles and those different skill sets. So I don't think we should be siloed, but I do think there are different ways of looking at the product that's being built that different perspectives bring in. I will say that some of the best testing I've seen done has been done by good developers on other developers' code. I think the difficulty is checking your own stuff or testing your own stuff. So I suspect well, I don't know, Sue said about cycles, maybe this is a longer cycle, maybe this is a 40 or 50 year cycle of like moving apart and coming back together again.
I think you know, Tariq mentioned the T-shaped people. It's almost like we should be a circle of T-shaped people. It's going to be an amazing Venn diagram if I ever get around to drawing it. But but basically, you need all of the perspectives. So I would want a tester on my team who had coded, but also a tester on my team who had never coded. Because then you get the different perspectives. You get the overlaps that you need. You need the overlap in the team and people on the team who are able to drill down into more detail in certain areas. So it comes back to building that team to get the job done. I like Isabel, started out, you know, once I got not accepted for the police, I went into coding, and I started out doing COBOL coding for a marine insurance company. And I actually lost that job because I was taking too long to write the code, because I was spending so much time testing it and getting it to run as close to perfectly as I could, but they wanted someone who could just shift code. And it was like, so okay, I went and did another job. You need the mixture. I find sometimes, because I understand all of these technologies, that it's difficult to then put myself in the perspective of somebody who doesn't understand all of these technologies. You know, use my mother as an example. I'm currently at my mother's house because she has better broadband, and she came in and saw this, what I've done to her office, which is currently three screens, lights, camera, action, all sorts of other stuff. And it was like, whoa. She said, I can just about cope with my mobile phone. I'm out of here. So I'm trying to put myself in her perspective as someone who's going to be using these systems is difficult. So getting someone in who doesn't have that underlying code experience, the white box visibility, is critical.
I think you're right. And since I think we have time for one more question to pass around. I think it's good to address, for either new testers or existing testers, or I even would say for you guys, because everybody needs to stay constantly up to date. What's your advice on that? What are the resources you go to stay up to date? What do you do?
Go to conferences like this.
A good one, for sure. Yeah, it's important. Like, I think the conference community is very, very important to kind of stay plugged in, especially in this time. There's some other resources for online learning. More recently, Test Automation University is a free online platform where you can go and learn all sorts of stuff about testing. It's Angie Jones over at ApplyTools is the director there, and it's been great. I've done a course, and I know several other thought leaders in the testing space have courses on there, but it's free. And I think definitely that's one way. Don't bypass a lot of the stuff that you can search for on the internet from the folks who've been in these cycles, right? For 2 cycles of 20 years, right? A lot of the stuff that whenever I'm embarking on something new, I do a search like that. And the last thing that I did was look for something on metrics, and I found a bunch of stuff from Dorothy Graham, and that was done back in the 90s. And so you just don't underestimate what is out there and the wealth of knowledge that's already there. So I think the internet is a great resource, obviously, for materials and blogs and stuff like that from those folks.
The thing I'd add to that, I agree with both of the others. There's a lot of good books, some of which have been around for a long time. You can still learn good things from them. Yes, behind Sue, lots of books. Look for books in different areas. I mean, I picked out some books. I've got Edward Tabono's 6 Thinking Hats. I bet you've got that up there as well. So as you look for stuff that's from different disciplines, I think is important. And a real key one is absolutely, don't ever think that you can stop learning, because on the one hand, you've got the new technologies, the new programming languages, and even where they're similar and the principles are the same, you kind of need to keep up to date with those. But also, it's just really good for your brain to keep on engaging with new things, and just keep it bright and active. It's rejuvenating to keep learning. So every so often, I mean, we call this testing yarns, and that's partly because of the sorts of things, we're all storytellers, but it's also because, particularly for Sue and I, but Tariq, I think it was your grandmother you were talking about in this conversation, that thing with handicrafts, with spinning and weaving for Sue, with quilting for me, crochet, knitting, music is another example, motorbiking, all sorts of different things that we all do. And each of those other skills, it keeps honing your ability to learn and your balance of your mind. So I would say it's really important to keep up to date, just broadly.
Yeah.
You know, just be doing things and learning things, even if they're not directly to do with the industry.
I think as well, it ties in with, as Tariq was saying earlier on, about the questioning, because if you're learning something new, especially if it's a handicraft where you've got that connection between, you know, the physical reality and what's going on in your head, it makes you ask questions. That's one of the reasons I got into spinning, because all the yarn shops disappeared in this country. You couldn't buy a decent ball of yarn anywhere. So it started me thinking, well, how do you make yarn? Which then takes you into, well, you need to get some base material, and then you need to apply twist, and you have torsion, and so on and so forth. So the questions keep materializing, which involves you in process. Then you can see where there are problems with the process, and you learn things around that. Then you can take those learnings onto how you might learn something in terms of you know, AI, for example.
And a key thing here, I think, is get yourself offline for a certain amount of time every day. Close the phone down, close the laptop down, put away the tablet, walk away from the electronics. Go and allow your brain to just think without anything intruding from the outside, and examine what's actually going on in your head. Because it's then that you get the ideas. Yep. You know, all the research is important, the looking on the internet is important, the reading is important, the doing is important. But that moment where you step back and you just let your brain engage it, you know, your brain is one of the most powerful computing machines in the world. And you need to leave it alone sometimes so it can just get on. And then you'll have ideas. And then you'll be on to maybe finding something that's new and innovative. That's important.
That's actually an excellent advice, Isabel, because yeah, you need to factor in time for thinking and learning. It cannot work just to be reactive for it. Yeah, so I think Tariq will have a shorter break until his session, but yeah, somehow I feel that we could talk about this forever, and yeah, that's thanks to you. Unfortunately, we do have a limited time, but hope to see you all next time, and then we can do another thing like this. Thank you again.
Great. Thanks for having us. Nice to see you all. Bye
now.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.